I am so excited because today we have Bethany, who is the CEO and owner of Bethany Works, a strategic brand and website design studio that specializes in building psychology-backed brands that leaves an impact and builds a legacy. And Bethany is not only one of my best business friends, but she's also a client inside of the Limitless mastermind, and she is the creator and genius behind my brand, the AW Creative. Hi, Bethany.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
Amazing. So today we're going to be focusing on talking about building an unbreakable brand, talking about how Bethany uses psychology when creating brands, how it's not just pretty logos, which is a big myth. And then we're going to go into a little bit about how she created my brand and how it was a lot more than just pretty photos and pretty logos and all of that. So Bethany, do you want to give a little background on what you do and how you started?
Yes, I will give the nutshell version.
Yes.
So I started getting into design, but primarily the idea of shaping and shifting perspectives in undergrad when I was getting my BFA. Like just the entire study of art and imagery is all about the way that it impacts our perspective, our culture, the decisions people make. And so that's really where it started to take shape for me in terms of what my design studio is today. There are a lot of different steps in between undergrad and actually starting my business. I went straight from undergrad into grad school. I had 4 to 5 different jobs at the same time. Had a photography business I owned on the side, worked all these industry jobs within design, because, college is expensive.
Yes.
After grad school, I jumped straight into a teaching position. I was able to teach graphic design, digital communications, photography, everything I loved. And I did that for about 5 years and was really hitting burnout because of everything that teaching is today.
Yeah.
And I decided that I was going to start this side hustle to pay off my student loans. And I was in the personal finance community of all places. I know art and money, people are like, what the hell are you talking about?
But does not compute.
Yeah, for me, they go together. And it was like a journey of, okay, I need to, really face my finances head on and figure this out. So my partner and I started a blog. That was my second business venture, right? Like photography was the first one. Second one was the blog. I thought I would make it big with my writing and everything on there, sharing my story, but I knew nothing about SEO. So that did not happen. They always say your first businesses fail, which is very true for me and my story. But what that led to is my first few clients. So someone was like, I really like your writing. Would you write for me? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And then they found out that I did design and they were like, would you design my website? Would you do this and that? And I was like, yeah, I know how to do that. I've done that in industry. So that opened the door to this online world of wow, people are just online doing this, which was a good realization for me. And then I decided to take it super seriously in 2018. I was like, listen, I want to grow this. I want to actually turn this into a business. I want to replace my teacher paycheck. So from 2018 to 2019 is when I really buckled down and took it very seriously in terms of building up a clientele. And then I was able to do that. So I replaced my teacher paycheck in 2019. I quit my teaching job. I took my business full time. I reshaped it a few times in between and then landed on today where I own a strategic brand and web design studio. I have a team behind me, so it's very exciting.
Yeah, and I think we met and started working together where I became your mentor. I think it was the summer of 2020.
Yes,
right?
The summer of 2020. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that's where everything changed for both
everything
of us.
Shifted. It really did. Yes.
So a conversation that we were having the other day when we were actually texting, and I said, I think there's a lot of businesses online, but there's not enough brands. So can you kind of elaborate for people who are listening, how it's possible to have a business and not have a brand? Because I think people use those two B words interchangeably. And so that is like a major issue I see in the marketplace. And it's something that we focus on in the mastermind, right? Is like, how do we build something for the long term? So kind of just from your expert, point of view of like, what is a business and what is a brand and how do they coexist together?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the shift in perspective is that if you own a business, you do own a brand, whether you know it or not. But the difference that I see, especially in the online space, but it's also true for brick and mortars, is the idea of a brand is that it's not your logo, it's not your pretty colors, it's not your email list or your reels or any of that. Your brand is the perception that people have about you. It's what they say
Yeah.
when you leave the room. It's what they're texting their friends or tweeting about your company. That is your brand. And so if you are looking to build a legacy, a business you could sell one day, something that's very serious and permanent to support you, to support your children in the future, then you should be looking at it as building a brand, because a brand can be unbreakable, but a business is definitely breakable. And the difference is that you are using visuals, messaging, everything, every place you show up to shape your brand, AKA shape those perceptions. That is a powerful, powerful tool that I see people skipping over because they're like, I have a logo, that means I have a brand. Like, no, that's not you. Your brand isn't active. You should be proactive about it because you are consistently shaping people's perspectives of your company and business. And if you're not, then you're really not paying attention to your brand and you're just running a business. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. But if you are there to build impact, to build legacy for yourself or your family, then you need to be considering the brand part of it.
Oh, 100%. And I think even when people come to me and are interested in like my programs or like the mastermind, they often come with the verbiage of, I just like don't even know what else to do because I just like hit this wall or I just feel like this is not sustainable. And they're like, I just feel that if I physically stop, then everything stops. And I was like, well, that's because you're running a business, not a brand, right? Because like a brand can have different branches, different levers, you can use your brand to create, other ventures. And then you have this like mass conglomerate umbrella of different brands under, the main brand. And I think that if you're not focusing on that legacy and that impact, and like, I feel like that's why we got along so well and why I trusted you to create e-brand for me and my brand strategy is because we do share that similar, like, I do want to build a legacy. I do want generational wealth. I do want impact on a global level. But I find that a lot of businesses aren't even thinking that way. They're just thinking about, well, what is the next money goal and how can I make that? But they're not actually focusing on like, how do I make this like a generational business, or how can I even like sell this to actually create massive wealth in the future?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there's a big part of that too. It's like, if you're looking at this from a revenue only standpoint, you're looking at it as a business, and there's nothing wrong with that. You should definitely
Yeah.
be looking at your revenue. But if
Yes.
you want impact and you want legacy and you want to make a difference, whether you're a product-based company or not, then you have to start thinking about shaping your brand versus just running a business.
Yeah. So when should someone start investing in brand building? Because it's obviously expensive. Like hiring someone like you or just like anyone who like is a professional brand builder, like that's an investment. So when do you usually suggest that people start working on that?
Yeah, such a good question. I also like to start this by saying expensive is relative. And with like branding in general, you're going to see a major ROI
Oh,
in
100%.
multiple ways, like in your revenue, obviously, but also in your confidence and your ability to show up and the way that you are cohesive across platforms. Like people are just naturally skeptical, and if you look great on the gram, but they go to your site and it's a disaster, or they don't have a good checkout experience or whatever it might be, there's a huge disconnect there, and that can cause confusion and cause, things to crumble. But what I would say is that in general, this is very general because everyone's path is different.
Yes.
Your first couple of years, you're figuring things out. Like if you
Mm-hmm.
are starting something from the ground up, you didn't like acquire a business, you're figuring that out. And
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people will make a small investment at first. They're going to hire a freelancer, they're going to get Canva, whatever it is. And that's fine. That is going to get you set up and started. But when you reach the point where you're like, I have no alignment, my clarity is not there, my brand does not match the value I bring. Like I bring a completely different level than when I originally started at, or I'm making a completely different pivot and serving new people. All of those reasons are reasons to rebrand, to invest in your branding, to invest in your website design. And I think that people think it's like one and done, but there are some, brands who pivot multiple times, which is the difference again between the business and the brand. If you're a brand and you're unbreakable, you have the ability to pivot, hire a professional to help you do that and continue on. And I think that can be really powerful. So in general, people hire someone 2 to 5 years in. Is that like the case for everyone? No, some people are like ready to go all in right away, and there's nothing wrong with that. I've had a couple clients like that. They have full-time jobs. They're like, nope, I'm going all in. I'm hiring you. Let's do it. And they have had massive success. So
Yeah.
I don't like to say there's like a specific rule book, but that's generally when you invest. But when you open your doors, you should be thinking about your brand right away, like immediately. And the other thing to note is that when you're investing, there's like an order of operations. Like Unbreakable
Yes.
brands know this. You have to do an order of operations. And the very first thing is brand strategy. So you could hire an agency like mine that does your brand strategy, your branding with some messaging, and your website design. That's like your first few steps. But you have to start with that brand strategy, because if you don't have that kind of foundation to direct your brand exactly where it needs to go, then your visuals aren't going to mean anything. And that's something I'm really passionate about. Like if you go do a brand photo shoot and you haven't done strategy or figured out your visual direction, then that brand photo shoot could be completely out of alignment. You just made it off of Pinterest and it doesn't mean anything. The strategy is what like provides meaning and intention and clarity. And that is what's going to ultimately attract people and open up their hearts and their wallets.
100%. And something that I see as like a major red flag is that people will often come to me and I'll look at their website and I was like, oh, is this a template? And they're like, no. And I was like, okay, well, can you show me your brand strategy deck? And they're like, oh, the person just did the website for me. They never actually did a brand strategy. And I'm like, what? I'm like, so how did they create this website? They're like, oh, I just told them like what colors and stuff I wanted. I'm like, but that's not how it works. Like, that's not actually, so they didn't actually build a brand for you, right? Where like, even for my brand, like we spent a really long time developing the deck for brand strategy, because that is where that cohesion happens. And
Mm-hmm.
then the visuals follow suit. So that's always like a major red flag when I see that in people's design. And also now when that I have a brand strategy deck, when I do hire, new hires, like I can send them the brand strategy deck and they are fully immersed and knowledgeable on my brand without actually me
Mm-hmm.
having to like dictate anything, which is
Right.
amazing, which builds actually a functional brand in the future when everybody's on the same page about what it is, what brand am I working for, right?
Yeah.
Because you need to know those kind of things. And then the second thing is from like a business mentor point of view. A lot of the times I'll get more newish clients like in their first like year or two of business, and they're like, well, I want to invest in business coaching, but I just really think I need like branding first. And I'm like, okay, well, do you have your offer suite mapped out? Do you know like your mission statement? Do you know like do you know what your like long-term goals are for your company? Like, do you know what you're building? They're like, no, I don't have any of that figured out. And I'm like, okay, so that's an issue. I highly recommend you hire me first, because, and this is just like a general rule I have for all of my clients, or just like anyone in general about like hiring anyone, is that there's an order of operations. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you or a social media manager, an OBM, whoever you hire, it is not their job to figure out your business.
So
Like,
true.
it's just not. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so if you think hiring a social media manager is going to blow up your business, but you haven't done the brand strategy work, you haven't worked with me to figure out your product suite, your messaging, your positioning, that social media manager is not going to be able to perform for you because they're actually not going to understand the brand. They're not going to understand your messaging. They're not even going to understand what you're trying to sell. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where people go into like investment, like overload, and they're like, oh, I'm just burnt out investment. I'm like, well, it's probably because you just haven't invested in the correct things at the correct time. So even like in the mastermind, when I'm like working with clients, like, and they're like, well, I really want to do this now. And I'm like, well, I think strategically that's not the best move because I also don't want you having a bad investing situation. So there is a chronological way of investing that gives you an ROI and is going to make you feel so much more calmer and more aligned because you've done it in the right order for you.
Yes. Yes. And this, like, I know we've talked about this before, but like
Yeah.
the symptom is I don't have clients or I don't have customers, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the symptom that a lot of your clients and my clients come to me
Yeah.
with. And they're like, okay, so they're trying to problem solve that. And like,
Yeah.
no fault of their own. Do they know what order of operations? Like I didn't when I started, and everything I know my area, right? And so I think it can just be so easy to get that investment overload. But what it comes back to is like, hey, your symptom is you don't have clients or customers. That's most likely because you don't stand out. You could literally take your images, your website, put it on any other business within your general industry, and nobody would tell the difference. And like that is the key piece of brand strategy and positioning work, which you help your clients shape, which I help
Yeah.
my clients shape. And like that is what is going to actually help you get the clients and do those other things. Like if you don't have that positioning piece down, then you're not going to stand out. And that's really the difference, especially in today's market where like people have a lot of options. I actually have a really good example of this that happened to me yesterday. We are in the process of like buying a home. So there's a list of home inspectors we were sent. And I know this is like a very different niche, but I
Yeah.
like all they give you is realtors like, here's the home inspectors, here's their websites. And they all looked exactly the same or it was broken. And I was like, okay, so like, how am I deciding between these? Like,
Yeah.
what's my decision making? I'm just going to pick one like randomly, and then no wonder they're not seeing that return. Like it works in every industry. It's
Oh,
across the board. It
100%.
doesn't matter if you're a social media manager or a home inspector.
Oh,
Like if I don't know
100%.
what makes you different,
Yeah.
how am I going to make a decision?
I just had that same experience because I called my insurance company because I like was having trouble finding a dermatologist because I, now have independent health insurance. And I was like, can you just like help me find one in Manhattan? And they're like, oh, we'll send you a list. I was like, okay. So they sent me the list and like I obviously Googled them because that's what I
Yeah.
do. And I was like, okay, but like, how am I supposed to pick a dermatologist from this list? And then I ended up picking one that like, had a good website, to be quite honest with you. Because I was like, okay, she seems like she knows what she's doing and she has reviews on there. And it's just like, I don't know, it looked very professional. And especially like living in Manhattan, like I want to know I'm going to a good dermatologist. So it's
Yeah.
like these little decision making things like matter. But a lot of times people were like, oh, well, I'll just like make sure my prices are really good, or I'll just like keep producing content and eventually something will stick. And I'm like, that is such a waste on so many levels. That is a waste of your time. That is a waste of your energy. It is a waste of money because you essentially are focusing your efforts on a money making activity that is not going to make you money. So overall, like the ROI from many different areas is just not there versus when you are starting to take your business seriously and start building a brand seriously, it's like, okay, I don't know the odd order of operations. I have an idea of what I want, but I don't have a clear way of how to get there and I don't want to waste time. So let me hire someone who knows the order of operations and will guide me in the right path. And I think that's when you immediately start seeing an ROI because you start doing things more efficiently, not just throwing spaghetti at the wall and being like, well, I hope it sticks.
Yeah. And more intentionally,
Yes.
like my job is to literally shape perspectives people have about your company based on what we
Yes.
create. And like that, if you're not using that tool, then you're missing out. You're just another link on a page of home inspectors or another dermatologist. And I was reading a study at the University of Michigan did, which was about like our visual cortex, and it's
Yeah.
responsible for a huge portion of our decision making. So not only are we making a decision based on the visuals, but there's a lot of studies. But then on top of that, there's like 5 different studies saying that if your brand is presented cohesively, is presented in a way that builds trust, that talks directly to your ideal customer, which is not everyone, it shouldn't be everyone,
Yeah.
then you're hitting those 2 points, which is going to immediately increase your customers or your clients. Like if you
Yeah.
have a cohesive brand, you're going to make 33 to 50% more in revenue every year. Many studies have done this, like just by being cohesive. So I think it's a massive tool that people have to utilize, and they have to hire a professional to do it. Like you cannot do what I do on your own. You can make a logo, sure. You can make a website with a template, sure. But you don't
100%.
know that that's going to serve you. Like,
Yeah.
is it serving your clientele, or do you just look like every other person in your industry now?
100%. And it's not even like, yes, like my brand is very like high end premium, but that's
Mm-hmm.
because that's what I want. That's what I wanted. And I'm sure you work with others that are, more relaxed and more relatable. And it's like, there's a reason why Chanel is Chanel and Walmart is Walmart, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the two are not competitors, right? Because Walmart has a certain look and feel to it, and they stick to what they know. And then Chanel has a certain look and feel to it and stick to what they know, right? Like Walmart, it would be really fucking weird if one day Walmart was like, we're going to try to be Chanel. Like that's like never going to happen in a million years, right? Both are extremely profitable billionaire brands, but they also, I'm sure, have like a boatload of brand strategists on their team carefully crafting the narrative of their stories. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, you're maybe like not at that level yet, but even as, a solo entrepreneur, you still should be thinking that way. If you, in a couple of years, 10, 20 years, if you're wanting to retire off of this business, like that is something you need to start thinking about.
Yes. Yes. And that's something we did together was competitor analysis. We
Yes.
do that with I do that with every
Yes.
client, is like, okay, who's in your realm and
Yep.
how are we going to make you different? How are we going to create a unique experience and journey and presence for you? And yeah, we're not looking at Chanel and Walmart. Like,
Yeah.
that's not competitor analysis,
Yes.
because they both sell clothing. Like that's not what we're doing.
Yes. And so we've already touched on this, but what are like some very explicit like myths around brand building? Like the logo is like the number one thing, that pretty pictures and logo. But honestly, like I see a lot of pretty bullshit out there. And yeah, it's you gotta spot it out.
Yeah. I mean, that is the biggest one, is like the fact that people think it is just the visuals. But a big part of it is also your messaging and your positioning, like we talked about. But like
Yeah.
the words that come with it are just as vital, which is why my agency partners with copywriters to make sure that part of it is done. And we come up with signature phrasing. So it's all of the pieces together. And I think that having a big picture lens can be really challenging. Like it's easier to check off that you got a logo and a color palette than it is to look at things from a big picture lens, because it can feel overwhelming. And I've seen
Mm-hmm.
that again and again. And so I think there's a big myth around there that you just are checking off some business checklist and being done with it. And that's really not the case. And the other piece of it is, I think there's a big myth that the one and done thing, which I slightly mentioned before, but like you don't just do it once and you're done. Like if you pivot, if you're changing direction, you should always be proactive about your brand and what you're saying and what you're doing, because that directly impacts customer and client satisfaction.
Yeah.
It like ties into that. And if you're not being proactive, then you're going to see customer and client satisfaction drop off like immediately. And the brand is more than just like what you're presenting, what you're showing, what you're messaging. Like, how are you helping other people? Like, how are you treating your employees? I mean, that in today's world, that's how we see a lot of brands get canceled or
Yeah.
go right down the tube, right? They show up, they say something stupid that's totally off brand that they didn't think about, or someone finds out that they treat their employees like total crap. And so that like, and then their whole image is about helping people, or they have sustainability as a core value, but they're not actually sustainable and they're doing, shady business practices. So
Yep.
if someone finds out some hole in your brand because you let it slip, because you got too busy, because you didn't care, then your brand can like get a little shaky. And so that's what happens when you're not proactive. And so it's never a one and done. It's always, how can we be better? How are we shaping? What's our next goal? Like those should be questions you're asking yourself even after you're done working with your strategist and designer.
Yeah. And even that, like the visuals even are an ongoing thing, because I feel like a lot of people are like, okay, well, I have my branding and website and now I'm done. And I'm like, well, what about when you like launch a podcast? What about when you launch a mastermind? What if you launch a course? Like for me, like, I mean, we built my brand, what was it, like this past January, so like almost like a year ago at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And like right now we're working on my, like for this podcast we're working on like the materials for it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's like even the visuals are a constant brand building project, because it is never finished. Your brand is a living, breathing organism that constantly needs attention, like, and love from you.
Yes, attention and love. And you bring up a great point. Like if you're bringing on a new offer or a new product, you need to go back to your designer, hopefully the same one who built your
Yeah.
strategy, and be like, hey, so this is my new sub brand. That's what it is. If you're adding on a podcast or you're adding on a course or whatever it might be that you're adding on, like one of my clients is adding on a product line, then you need to talk to your strategist to make sure it's not only going to look on brand, but that it's supporting your overall vision for the direction that your company is going.
Yeah, 100%. And then
Yeah.
something else that we really talked about in depth when we were building my brand, a part of the brand strategy piece, was archetypes. So, for people who don't know what brand archetypes are, they're actually really important. And if you especially have trouble with messaging, positioning, like even in your content, knowing your brand archetype is extremely important. So, can you go into like what is a brand archetype? And you can even talk about like how we developed mine.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm obsessed with brand archetypes. I could talk about them for hours. So brand archetypes are one way you can approach brand strategy. It's how I approach brand strategy because I do psychology backed design. So I want your design to not only mean something, but to like get inside the heads of your ideal clients and customers. And how you do that is through specific brand personas. And I have to preface this by saying, you and I as humans, anyone listening to this, are complex. We have multiple archetypes that we probably are, right?
Yeah.
But your brand needs to specifically align with 1 to 2 of them, generally 2. There are 12 archetypes. I didn't come up with them. Jung did back in the day. These are 12 archetypes we recognize as humans as being personas, things we know right away. And what you want to do is align your archetypes with exactly where your client is at. They have a desire, they have an internal and external problem. So you're using those 3 things to align with an archetype that directly speaks to their problems and their desires. And so that step is so powerful in it becoming a psychology-backed design rather than just a design based on your ideas. You actually have some foundation in there. So there's like the rebel archetype, which we all kind of know what that's like. That's like Harley Davidson. We know that's the rebel archetype right away.
Yep.
And then there's other ones like the hero, Nike. We know that's the hero
Yes.
archetype. Like,
Yes.
so you can, all of the big brands have these archetypes aligned with them. Their strategists know them. They use them to shape their messaging and their copy all the time. And so one of your archetypes is the ruler archetype or royalty, whatever you want to call it, but it has an air of exclusivity to it. Not that you're not inclusive, but you're exclusive and you serve an elite clientele who have a specific mission. You are the Mercedes-Benz. You're not the Toyota having a Toyota-thon offering things for free all the time. That works for some brands, but your brand is the Mercedes Mercedes-Benz. And that's the direction we wanted it to go in terms of messaging, positioning, and visuals. And just having that to shape it means you're going to work with people who also want to be ruler archetypes. They want to be in that place in their lives of luxury, of every day they are living a little bit of luxury. Like that was a big part of our conversation.
Yeah.
And so we use that archetype to shape your specific brand. And that's what I do with every one of my clients. They're aligned with 2 archetypes. One tends to be more dominant in the visuals and the messaging, and the other one tends to come in as the supporting act. A lot of times, like if you're a maker or creator, you're usually the creative, right? But you're also something else, because that something else is going to be what makes you different overall. So yeah, they're very exciting. I'm obsessed with them. I actually have a brand quiz, which I'm sure we'll link in the show notes, that you can take, and it'll match you with your top 2 archetypes. It's not 100% accurate, so feel free to take it a few times if you want to, but it is a fun quiz to get you started and get the conversation started about what your personas are that are backing your brand. Because going back to myths, I think that's another big myth, is that like people often assume they are the brand in the online space, but you are not your brand. And the minute you make that shift, that your business and brand is separate from you as a human, you might love yellow and teal, but that is not going to work for your brand. You start making decisions as a CEO rather than, a person running a business. And I think that that can really make a big difference in all your decisions.
100%. Especially if because if you're someone who like me, where you don't have a creative bone in your body, but because you're definitely like more masculine and strategy focused, me. So like I knew what I wanted, right? But I also knew like I physically couldn't achieve that vision for myself, right? So this is something I see online a lot, is that these businesses say they're premium and say they're, like their prices, are at a certain, high ticket price point. But then what I physically see visually does not match up to that language or even those prices. So it's like, once again, like you're acting like a Walmart, but you want to be a Chanel, right? And if you don't know how to become a Chanel, then you're just never actually going to be able to get those clients that want a Chanel level service.
Exactly. Yeah. If you don't align your business and the way you present yourself with the clients that you want, you're not going to see it. Like maybe you'll see a few people, but like you are not going to see it on the scale that you want to see it. And that goes back to when I was saying like you can cause your own confusion, or you can cause things to crumble on your own if you're not approaching it in a strategic way. Like you can do it to yourself, unfortunately, but like you have to really think about all of those pieces. And archetypes is one of the ways that I can provide a really helpful structure for my clients to see like, oh, okay, this is exactly what I want for my brand. This aligns perfectly with what I'm doing every day. Like I might be a rebel on the weekends singing, at a bar as my side hustle, but like in my business, that's not what I am. Like that separation is really important for them to see and read and watch it happen.
100%. Well, I'm absolutely obsessed with my brand. And I know all of your clients and a couple of the women in the mastermind, and just my other clients. Hold on, somebody's ringing my doorbell. Oh, my God.
Dang. Okay.
Oh, no, yes, they are. Thank you. Oh, fucking FedEx. Anyways, what were you saying?
You were talking about your clients and you.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. What was I saying? Oh, that people in the mastermind, in the Limitless mastermind, or just like one of my other clients you've worked with and created brands for them, all have been on different spectrums of archetype and colors and different, like we've all had such different brands created for us, but they all look so unique, so perfect to us. And it's just like such like amazing to see that you're able to create these different level brands like on a spectrum from A to Z. So I just think that you are so, so talented. And
Thank you.
I'm so excited that you're my brand strategist. So
Thank you.
where can people find you and how can they work with you?
Yes. So my website is bethanyworks.com. You can start there. I'm also very active on Instagram. Bethany Works Design is my handle. That is a great place if you want to voice note or reach out to me in the DMs to chat about things. That's where to go. If you're ready to jump in, fill out my inquiry form. It's linked on Instagram and my website. Both of those are awesome. And then if you take my brand quiz, which will be linked in the show notes, you'll be added to my email list and get all of my tips and tricks on there as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Bethany.
Yes, thank you for having me.